Hello, my name's Roger Patterson and I'd like to welcome you to the BIBBA Bee Improvement course of 2022. The practical element will be in various locations throughout the country, but this online element will be available for everybody. We have changed it from what was organised pre-COVID, so although it is still a 2-day course, the video element you can really view at your own leisure at home, but it is important that you view all the elements. We split it up into 5 parts, and this is part 1. So as I say, welcome to the course. I hope you've seen the short overview video, which was intended to be just a little snapshot of what to expect. The course will cover all you need to produce queens. It is not just a case of showing people how to graft and how to use mini nukes. There are lots of other things involved which I will tell you as we go through. We hope to describe and demonstrate several methods of queen rearing. We suggest that you try all of them and practice on them as much as you can. Then of course you can choose the one that suits you, but I suggest very strongly that you get proficient before trying something else. Having done many of these courses in the past, what I find is that people just have a sort of minute or 2 minutes, decide whether they like it or not, and then move on to something else. And quite frankly, I think it's more important to learn how to do one before moving on to the other. What we really want to do is to help you folk produce good queens for your area, good quality queens, and from good genetic stock as well. And of course, as with everything in beekeeping, we want you to enjoy it whilst you're doing it. They should be better than some of the queens that you can buy, because they've been produced hopefully for your district, rather than from many miles away, many thousands of miles away sometimes, in different climates. The course is exactly the same as the very successful courses we used to run pre-COVID. They used to be 2 days at the venue. What we've done now is to split it up so there's only 1 day at the venue and 1 day home learning. This is mainly through a PowerPoint presentation, which is online, which you've obviously found. It's in 5 parts, of which this is the first part. Now, attendees can view it at leisure at home, and the great thing about being recorded is that if you want to check it out, you can of course rewind and go back. There will be a resource list. This will be emailed to you. Please study as much as you can. There shouldn't be any conflicting information at all, because we've carefully selected the material. And then there's a practical in the April, which is obviously hands-on. This will be with experienced tutors, long-term beekeepers, and people who've raised lots of queens. As I already said, there are several locations throughout the country, and you should have already booked on one before being able to access this course. There will be further information emailed to you, joining instructions and that sort of thing. Sorry, I forgot the 4th element, which is the social one. Now, beekeeping shouldn't always be about perhaps food and drink, but one of the great benefits is that you can meet other beekeepers, have a chat with them, see how they keep their bees. May well be people that you've never even met before. You're always going to learn something. There's usually lots of ideas discussed, which perhaps should be confined to breaks, but very often it overflows into the main session. But providing people are learning, that's fine. There will probably be an opportunity for a pub meal on the evening of the practical session, or the previous evening of the practical session, for those who wish, and that's usually a good ice breaking opportunity. Whatever we do in beekeeping, in my view, I think beekeeping really should be fun. A little bit about the course. You need to view the PowerPoint element before the practical, obviously, so that you know what to expect, what to do, and what we're trying to achieve. So the self-learning of the fundamentals is very important. Give yourself plenty of time, because what we'll probably find is that people want to rewind and go back and check and then just keep looking. If you leave it to the last minute, it could be too late. You need to be at a reasonable competence level. Obviously, if you're already good at queen rearing and bee improvement, you're not really going to learn very much, and you probably ought to be doing the teaching anyway. But it's honestly, it is no good if you turn up and you don't even know the basics, so you don't know the life cycles or anything like that. So please do the reading. Even if you're fairly new to beekeeping, if you're fairly quick at learning and you understand what I call the basics, then you should be okay. You need to know the basics, as I've already mentioned, and you also need to be serious about rearing queens too. I've been to many so-called queen rearing events, and people come along just to have a go. That's not really what we're after. We want people who genuinely want to improve their bees and do it by queen rearing. Now, there may well be some duplication with what you see in these 5 videos with other presentations that I've given. That is fully intended, because what we don't want to do is to confuse people. You should be learning well-tried methods and perhaps some variations, because in beekeeping there very often are variations, and we won't just be sticking you to one method and that's it. But please accept that the demonstrators don't know all the methods there are, and hopefully we can all learn, not just the attendees but the demonstrators too. So at the apiary, you will be handling bees, or you've got the opportunity to handle bees anyway. We'll try and work around the weather if we can, but of course one day, if it's hammering down with rain all day, then we've obviously got a little bit of a problem that we hope we can overcome one way or another. We'll try and work at the pace of the attendees, but if somebody is genuinely way behind, simply because they haven't done their homework, then I'm sorry, we may have to leave you behind, because it's unreasonable and unfair on people who've given up their time and spent money on a course to be held up to show people what a drone or a worker is. Please ask questions throughout. It is a small group, and it's much better that way than not understanding something, and it could just perhaps be terminology or a regional thing, because our demonstrators will come from throughout the UK. So please ask questions. I'm probably going to be one of the demonstrators, and I'll probably provide the equipment, or most of it anyway. Please don't rummage around in the various boxes I've got, because you might get bitten. I tend to have things like like scalpels there, and you know you can if you rummage around in the box you can hurt yourself. I know what's there, but other people don't. We're very grateful for the hosts to provide their apiary and their bees and their facilities. Please respect them, and please don't go charging off and telling other people that the hosts don't keep their bees very well because they don't do it your way. We all have different ways of keeping bees, and you know, please respect the host. There will be some guidance notes, not just for joining, but for other things as well. It explains apiary etiquette, all sorts of things like that. So please read them, and if you can, print them off and bring them with you. Now, it's not just a case of learning and that's it. All we're going to be able to do really in the time available is to show you what we're doing. Any practice you'll need to do when you get home. So all I ask really is let's please improve our bees, not just for the bees themselves, but for us, the beekeepers as well. Because if we improve the honeybee population in the UK, and that includes the wild population, by the way, then we are helping bees to survive better. A little bit about the tutors. They're all practical beekeepers, and we've all done it. What we're not doing is just reading books and then coming telling you. So we're speaking and demonstrating largely from experience, not simply recycling from books or training manuals or videos or whatever. There are downsides to many things in beekeeping, and we will be telling you what can go wrong because it often does. Don't forget, we are just probably small scale beekeepers, amateurs. We're not the professionals who are doing it all the time, and they probably have things that go wrong anyway. It could be weather related, you know, it could be a whole load of things. But we will we'll tell you some of the things that go wrong. It's not intended to be negative at all, but so that if something does go wrong, it may not be your fault. What we'll probably try and do is give you a reason for it. All the tutors will be very open-minded, have no fixed ideas at all. So if somebody comes up with something we either haven't heard of, or they've tried it, or they do it and it works, I can promise you we will listen. It's not just going to be pow, pow, pow. You're going to learn what we're going to tell you, and that's it. Because, of course, even long-term beekeepers still learn. And in any case, there are always different methods and variations. So don't just shut your mind off and say the only way is the way that you do it. This is not a queen rearing course. It is a bee improvement course, but it does include colony handling techniques, assessing colonies, so that you know which ones to raise queens from and those not to raise queens from. We'll give you a few ideas of selection criteria. You might have your own. That doesn't matter. If it suits you in your area, that's fine. We will explain and show you how to set up colonies to raise queens, and give you an idea which colonies perhaps that you should be raising queens from, and which queens to replace. We will be showing you how to propagate queens. These will largely be what one might term the artificial methods. And there's a whole load of other things besides, very often prompted by questions. But don't worry. There's not going to be so much information that you just can't take it all in. All these things go together, and it's a different concept than the usual queen rearing course where they just teach you the absolute basics and that's it. So this course is not simply about grafting, using mini nukes and nothing else. You can't rear good queens without knowing what I call the basics. Unfortunately, many try, but they usually are doomed to failure. So what are the basics? Well, here are a few examples. Obviously the life cycles, which you need to know, and it's surprising, the more I get around the country, the more I find people have been keeping bees 10, 15, 20 years, simply do not know the life cycles. Well, of course, the queen life cycle is very important. Also, many beekeepers simply do not know what's happening in a colony when it's preparing to swarm. You need to be able to identify natural queen cells, swarm, supersedure and emergency. And I don't mean the where they are on the comb. I mean by actually studying the colony, which will give you the information. And you need to know what happens in a colony when the queen is removed, and it isn't always the same thing. Here's an example. I did a little experiment starting on the 22nd of May 2019. Where what I did was I took 4 colonies and I dequeened them on the same day, and then over the next 6 days I checked to see the number of queen cells in those colonies. Now, if you read the books, they will tell you the standard information, and the impression given is that bees don't change from that. But this simple experiment I did shows that is not necessarily the case. So column 1 is the identification of the colony. A, B, C and D we call them. They obviously weren't A, B, C and D, but for the purposes of put it up on this box, they are. Along the top is the date and the day that they were inspected or something was done. Now, it was roughly the same time each day, certainly within an hour or two anyway. If you're looking at 4 colonies and you're counting queen cells, then obviously it takes a bit longer one day than the next. So it might be sort of half hour, an hour out. These are the number of queen cells that were in the colonies on each day. So, this one here, colony A, was a swarm that came to a bait hive on the 12th of April. So what, five weeks earlier. Now, that was the one with the lowest number of emergency cells after the queen was taken away, which might be relevant to the fact that it was a swarm. Colonies B, C and D were all full colonies with 2 to 3 supers. So they're honey production colonies, all with overwintered queens. Now, I'm in an oilseed rape area, so there was the 2 to 3 supers were probably fairly full. So on the following day, 3 colonies, they hadn't even started to build queen cells, but one of them had started 14 queen cells. After 2 days, all of them had started queen cells, bar colony A. And colony A, after 5 days, they were still increasing the numbers, because the previous day they had 3. The same with colony D. they had decided that they were going to put up one. Now I have to say that I was quite meticulous in counting the queen cells. Now, colony B, after 4 days, 3 queen cells have been aborted, even though they built 33. 3 of them have been aborted, and they built 3 more on that inspection. Now, obviously, I can tell that they were aborted because they were tearing them down. The following day, on the 5th, they still decided they wanted another 4 queen cells. Why do they need that number when they really only need 1 queen? And the same colony, they'd aborted 1 queen cell on the fifth day, let's say, and they still built 1 more on that inspection. So even after 6 days, they wanted to get a high number. Colony C, on the 5th day, 1 queen cell had been aborted with none built on that inspection. But if you look at the following day, they built 4. And colony D, there were 2 queen cells aborted on the 6th day, but they built none on that inspection. Now that tells you that there's a great variation in colonies when you take a queen cell away. So you cannot say when you take a queen away. So you cannot say that if you take a queen away, this or that or something else happens, because this simple experiment, which anybody can do, shows you that that's not necessarily the case. And I'll suggest very strongly you try it yourself. It's a very simple experiment to do, and although it won't tell you what bees always do, it'll tell you some of the variations. Also, it's pretty handy to be able to spot queens, see eggs and larvae. And as we all know, there are a certain percentage of beekeepers that can't do that. But don't worry, because we will supply magnifying aids to help you. It's useful always to know the age of larvae, even if you're not queen rearing. Can you do any of these things, or all of these things, or just think you can? Don't worry, we will give you a little bit of help if we can. Now, we probably all know there's a lot of unreliable and inappropriate information written and spoken about queen rearing, very often by people who haven't done it. You could say the same about beekeeping in general, really, because there are always people willing to give advice that may well be gleaned from elsewhere, because there's a lot of cut and paste in beekeeping, mainly from inexperienced writers and presenters simply copying mistakes that other people have made. Much of the standard teaching, or what I call the standard teaching, is relevant to exotic and prolific bees, not the ones that suit our condition, the less prolific ones, but there'll be more about that later. What I do suggest is that you challenge what you're told. You don't have to do it openly. Very often you can do your own experiments, one of which I've just suggested, which is take a queen away from several colonies on the same day, and then just monitor them, and you very often find that what you're told isn't always correct. That, of course, is why I've written the book, Beekeeping Challenge What You're Told, which really covers the information that I've done on a presentation for several years, and originally was intended to be just a booklet. It ended up being over 100,000 words. But I'm not here to sell you books, but there is a lot of information in there that sort of explains perhaps why bees don't do what their owners think they should. Some useful points. You really do need sound knowledge and to know how bees will react to whatever you do. Now, of course, that's not always the same, because very often you can get two colonies side by side that appear to be in the same condition. You do the same thing to them and you go back 7, 10, 14 days later and they've both reacted differently. That is biology. Some of what you'll learn on the course may not be found in books, especially the more, let's say, the more popular ones. You need, as a beekeeper, to be observant. Observation is a great asset to have. So is lateral thinking, because you need to be able to interpret what the bees are saying to you, and then think to yourself, well, so and so is going to happen tomorrow, or 2 days time, 7 days time, or whatever. And in doing so, try to keep things simple, because if you have a problem, you generally find one or more ways of getting out of a problem. Very often in beekeeping, you don't just need plan B, you need plans B to J. So you need to be fully aware of what's needed. When you're raising queens, don't be greedy. If you're greedy, you'll probably end up either with poor quality queens or failure. So don't try to cut corners unless you fully understand what you're doing. Now, if you read queen rearing books, they're very often written by large scale producers. So of course they're reflecting the methods that they use. What we're aiming at is people who either just want a few queens for themselves, or perhaps they're members of a group, or small scale queen rearers, or perhaps local beekeeping associations that are producing queens for their members. So, you know, no more than perhaps 100 queens or 150 queens a year. I myself usually produce that sort of number, certainly 200 as a maximum. But the methods we'll be showing you will be for fairly small numbers. Some things that you should know. Queen cells can be overdue for emergence. Up to 4 days is becoming quite common. I say becoming because I think it's something that's come into beekeeping probably since about the turn of the century. And it's not until you start raising queens artificially that you realise these things are happening. Perhaps you've got a row of 10 queen cells in a bar on a frame, and you may find one of them emerges several days after the rest. Whereas with natural queen cells, of course, you can always be a couple of days out, because you don't really know the age of the queen cell or when the egg was laid. You'll obviously know why we protect queen cells and how to do it, although that may well be demonstrated if we're asked. But the way that I favour is just a little bit of silver foil like this, or cooking foil. Make sure it's metal, not plastic. Dimpling on queen cells, we're always told that they must be heavily dimpled. The smooth ones aren't any good. Get rid of those. But again, challenge what you're told, because they can vary as well, and for different reasons. Also, the thinning of the end of the queen cell, which is usually done in the last day or so, presumably so the queen inside can chew around the tip of the cell to release herself. And there's one there just about to emerge. You can see the tip has thinned down, and the queen is cutting herself out. If you get a colony with variable workers, obviously the queen mated with lots of different types of drones, then you will obviously get variable queens, because what was destined to be a worker is now becoming a queen. So they will have certainly different male genetics. A frame of brood, when it emerges, you get 3 frames of bees. And the reason I mention it is because if you're making up a queen mating nuke, then if you're making it up with sealed brood, we all know that brood is sealed for around about 12 days. So within 10 or 12 days, 1 frame of sealed brood will be 3 frames of bees. So if you're making up, let's say, a 5-frame nuke, and you've got 2 or 3 frames of sealed brood, then when you go back in a week or a little more of time, they're probably all hanging out of the front, if they haven't put up queen cells. There is more on another slide. We're often told that queenless bees are always bad-tempered. Oh no, they're not. When you're raising queens, you'll have a lot of queenless colonies, and that is not my experience at all. Unless, of course, they're normally bad-tempered in the first place, then you expect them to be bad-tempered anyway. This, of course, is one of the myths of beekeeping. We're also told that we need prolific queens. Well, that's fine, perhaps in southern Europe, where the climate is much better. But personally, I don't think prolific queens do well heading colonies in our climate. We're always told that the size of queens is important. We must have big queens, but I've had ever so many small queens that have laid and laid and laid without any problem at all, and it's the larger queens that fail. Obviously, the prolific queens have got more eggs going through their bodies at the same time, so expect them to be larger. Once emerged, it takes around about 5 days for a queen to sexually mature, when she is then capable of going out and getting mated. If she goes out and gets mated, it takes around about 3 days for her to come into lay. So as once emerged, it's usually a minimum of 8 days before a queen starts to lay, and you'll see eggs. Depending on the weather, it can usually be 10, 12, perhaps 15 days. Sometimes in a bad summer, it can be 3 or even 4 weeks. You need to be aware that conditions vary, even just a short distance away. Perhaps if you get into a hilly area, down on the plains, it could be very, very different conditions than even only 10 miles away up in the hills. And this is not very often mentioned, especially in books or by teachers. But beekeepers who've got these conditions locally usually know the conditions very well. And here are some more. Bees will swarm on all kinds of queen cells. They don't just have to be swarm cells, as many people think. In my experience, if you've got supersedure cells or emergency cells, if the colony is in the right condition and the weather is fine, they will swarm on all kinds of queen cells. Beekeepers are very often advised to leave 2 queen cells as an insurance in case one is dud. Again, in my experience, what they can do is swarm on the first one to emerge, leaving the second one to take over the colony. You're very often advised to leave unsealed queen cells, because you don't know if a sealed queen cell is dud. or not, which doesn't really make sense because even the unsealed ones can be sealed. Now the only real problem you've got is if a queen cell is emerged. Very often the lid comes down, out comes a queen, a worker bee goes in to clear up the residual royal jelly. Other bees close the lid, sort of semi-seal it, and you end up with a dead worker inside, and it looks very much like an unemerged queen cell. All you need to do is just touch the tip, and if it has previously emerged, it will just come off quite easily. The great thing about leaving an unsealed queen cell is that sealed queen cells, or rather that queen cells are sealed for about 7 days. So if you've got an unsealed queen cell, you've got at least 7 days before it emerges. I must mention the problems with queens that have appeared since about the turn of the century. These are well documented on Dave Cushman's website. Some people are still adamant that there aren't any problems, but the main ones are young queens failing, young queens being superseded, and queens simply disappearing. Check up on Cushman's website, the page that I've got there, and I'm sure if you've been keeping bees any length of time, you can recognise what I've written there. These days, for whatever reason, virgin queens often emerge with deformed wings. If they do, of course they can't fly, and I suggest very strongly that if you know when a virgin queen is going to emerge, within 2 or 3 days, just check the colony out, try to find her, and make sure she's got all her wings, or intact anyway, because if she hasn't, of course she goes out to get mated, obviously can't fly. So if you leave it the 3 weeks or whatever it is normally advised, then of course there's no queen there, and the poor birds get blamed for it when the queen may well not even have got off the ground. Here's one here, and you can see that queen clearly can't fly, but that's obviously a virgin queen. Be positive. If you think you should be doing something, in my experience, it's better to try it, even if you fail. You'll learn something, and you might either modify it for next time or abandon it altogether. You need to be fairly positive in beekeeping, I'm afraid. Of course, one of the things is that if you've got a queen that you're not too sure about, will she make it through the winter? They never ever get better if there's a problem with them. So you might as well replace her rather than she take a whole colony out during the winter. And if you do have problems, as you're likely to with, especially with queen rearing, don't give up, give it another crack. And we've all had a bar of 10 larvae that we've set up and had a complete failure. If you regraft or repunch or whatever, you can very often get 8 out of 10, and there's no real reason for it. Don't give up, keep going. Here's a few things I do that might help you, not only in your beekeeping but also with your queen rearing as well. The Patterson unit, which I'll describe later. I also make sure that in general my brood combs are drawn out above the queen excluder, so I very rarely put foundation in a brood box. Colony of bees has got to produce drones. I've removed many hundreds of colonies from what I call the free living situation, wild nests in trees, buildings and that sort of thing. And I know it's observation only, but about 10 to 15% of the total comb area is devoted to drone, usually on the periphery of the nest. So I think to myself, well, if that's what bees want, then that's what I'll give it to them. And I find that if I give them one drone comb, not the outside comb, but the one next adjacent to the outside comb, they they generally don't chew down my my other combs. I clip and mark queens as a matter of course because that helps with my colony management. Now I do move combs and bees between colonies, and I know this is frowned upon by quite a lot of people simply on the disease issue. But to my mind, you ought to be able to recognise disease, and if you spot it, then obviously don't move combs around. I'll now briefly describe the Patterson unit, which is something I introduced to help overcome the problems with queens that I discussed earlier. It's a very simple system, and the unit is a number of honey producing colonies. 4 works out to be about right, but if you've only got 2 colonies, then that's your unit. If you've got 6 colonies, you've got the choice of having 6 colonies in your unit or 2 units of 3. Now, if there's a problem with the queen or the bees in any of the honey producing colonies, normally in order to put it right, you need to take something away from one of the other honey producing colonies. So I introduced what I call a support colony, which can be anything from a 2-frame nuke right up to a full colony. Even as a full colony, I can take material. So if I want, let's say, a queen or a frame of brood or a frame of food, it comes out of a support colony rather than one of the other honey production colonies. That, of course, keeps the honey production colonies fully productive. There you'll see a brood chamber, which looks like a double brood chamber colony. In fact, it isn't. What it is a brood chamber being used as a super above a queen excluder, and that brood chamber has got foundation in, so the bees can build brood comb, above a queen excluder. There is a video on the BIBBA website on the system, and that's what you need to look for. Using brood chambers as supers I've just hinted on. Here is one at the bottom of my garden, and there is a brood chamber above a queen excluder that you can see. It's also got supers on as well, and I've used this system for probably at least 40 years, and I find it a really good way of producing good brood combs. Some benefits of that is the foundation doesn't go stale, because if you put foundation in a brood chamber, bees will only draw out foundation if they've got an income which to produce the wax. So if you get a week's bad weather, the bees climb all over it, and it goes sort of stale. If you get another week's bad weather, what the bees often do is just chew holes in, and it can wreck your foundation. But if you put it above a queen excluder, there are far less feet wandering all over it, and it doesn't go stale so readily. What I find is that bees draw comb out much better, and I've told other people of this system, given it information in presentations, and I've had so many beekeepers come and say that's a good idea, I do it, and yes, it works well. Now what can happen is, if you put it on narrow foundation, narrow spacing, obviously, you can uncap them nice and straight, extract them, and then of course you've got good combs that you can use. If you don't want to uncap them, then just use them for for other colonies. What you then have is drawn brood comb instantly available, and if you look after it, it's virgin comb, so you shouldn't have any wax moth problem. It will certainly keep for 2 or 3 years, providing you keep the mice out, obviously. The queen can then very quickly lay it up, so you get a much quicker build up if you want to build a new cup. You've also got food combs if needed, as I've already mentioned, and I've explained this method to some people who then use it for winter feeding. Okay, it is honey, whereas people who are selling honey will probably want to extract the honey and feed sugar syrup of one description or another. But the great thing about it is you've got the support colony for mating queens in. So that is one of the reasons that I'm mentioning it here, because you've already got a ready-made queen mating, either nuke or colony. And the good sound beekeepers will probably recognise there's a lot of flexibility with that system, and also the Patterson unit as well. So here's a typical brood comb. I've produced many of these over the years, and you know, if you put that in the centre of a colony, a queen can lay it straight up. Whereas if you put foundation in, they've got to build it out first. There are many beekeepers who've got combs like this, or even worse. Certainly 25% of that comb isn't much use. And I find that you avoid combs like that. This is a good drone comb I was telling you about. It's much better, in my view, for the bees to put most of their drones in one comb like that. You can also do other things with it. Of course, you can uncap it to check the varroa levels, and if they're high, you just take a comb like that out, wrap it up in a piece of polythene, put it in a plastic bag, put it in the freezer for a week, and then replace it. And a comb like that that's frozen, just put straight back into a colony, and the bees will soon clear it up. I clip and mark queens as a matter of course, because it helps management. And I've always done it by hand like this. I've never ever used one of the aids, but of course you can use exactly what you like. All you need to make sure is that you don't cut the leg off a queen, because if you do, she will be superseded very quickly. Now, moving combs around, I advise people to check one comb in every colony at every inspection that has got brood in all stages. So check the unsealed brood for signs of European foul brood, and the sealed brood for signs of American foul brood. And I think if you do that, rather than just assume you won't get a foul brood if you don't move combs around, is a much better approach. There are stages of bee improvement. You need to know what you want, so you make up your own selection criteria. It might be quite simple, or it could be a longer list. That's entirely up to you. You then need to know what your colonies are like, so you need to assess them, not only your own bees, but local bees as well, because if you just assess your own bees, you'll be they're the only ones you'll know, and you won't know how good they are, or if somebody else has got something better, so you can improve your own. So have a word with other local beekeepers, see if you can have a look at their bees. Go to local beekeeping association teaching apiaries and see what their bees are like, and compare them. You clearly need to understand the process, which will be described later. You then need to obtain queen cells in one way or another. And then, of course, once that's done and they're sealed and they're usually within a day or two of emerging, you need to distribute them, and we will show you how to do that. Then, of course, queens emerge and hopefully go out on their mating flights. Having done that, and if the queen comes back and starts laying, you need to assess them again, continual assessment, because you need to make sure that you've made improvement. I will warn you, sometimes you can go backwards, but that's all part of really being an amateur beekeeper, usually in an area of fairly high mongrelization. Planning is very important in my view, in all aspects of beekeeping, even bee improvement and queen rearing. And of course, I always try to enjoy things, and enjoyment really has got to be part of it, in my view. So assessing then your own bees, I do it at every inspection. It should be habit. You're probably doing it anyway, but perhaps not in a way that might help you raise further queens or improve your bees by raising queens. If you're assessing something, you're measuring it in some way. If you're measuring it, you then need to record it, because then you can make comparisons with your own bees and those of others. So perhaps if you've only got 4 colonies or 400, it really doesn't matter. You need to know which are your better ones and which are the ones that need replacing. Also, it gives you the opportunity to assess other people's techniques as well, especially handling, because colonies can get fired up if they handle badly, which you'd expect them to do. You can, of course, then compare them with your techniques as well. Handling, I think, is important, because it does reflect the sort of characteristics of bees just a little bit, but you really must give the bees a chance. You've got to assess them fairly. So use smoke appropriately. Too much will make them roar around all over the place. Too little and they can get a little, let's say, spiky. Make sure you handle gently with fairly slow movements. If you move your hands fast, you must expect bees to follow your hands. That's not the bees' fault, because they see you as a threat. Now, just because your movements are reasonably slow doesn't mean to say that you're not doing your manipulations quickly. Because if you roar around, you'll probably spend as long pulling stings at you as doing the job. If you're assessing in a group, try to use the same handler for all the colonies on the same day. So perhaps, I don't know, there's 4 or 6 of you. Try to get one person to do it today, somebody else at the next inspection, somebody else at the next inspection. Because we all handle slightly differently, even though we may well be taught by the same person. Some people might use a little more smoke or a little less than somebody else. Somebody might be just a little bit rougher. Somebody's hand movements might be quicker. And if you use the same handler each time, you're really taking the human element out, and you're then assessing the colonies rather than the handling. What I do know is thick gloves make you clumsy, so I suggest that you don't wear thick gloves if you're trying to assess a colony, because it only takes a little bit of clunking around, and a colony might get fired up. We will demonstrate handling in the practical session. In fact, that will be a major part of it, and probably one of the first things that we will will do, depending on the weather and how the particular course is set up. We can then see how the bees react to what we do. So assessing, what can we assess bees for? Well, I think temper should be right at the top of everybody's list. I once went to a lecture by a very well-known beekeeper, a household name that everybody thinks is wonderful, and temper was 8th on their list. And I thought to myself, what sort of message does that give a beginner? Well, quite honestly, some of the other things that were in front, I wouldn't even bother with. But I think temper is important. Everybody's got to handle bees. A lot of beekeepers have got neighbours and even people from the same household. So be reasonable to them, and you can forget all the old stories about bad-tempered bees produce more honey. That's not my experience. I think quietness on the comb is a good characteristic. Because some bees are rather calm and they just go about their business. Others rush around all over the place. If the bees rush around, so do the queens, and it takes longer to handle a colony. Suiting the locality is incredibly important. There are a lot of bees that I come across that simply do not suit the locality. Well, I'm afraid natural selection will probably take them out. Those 3 things, I think, are enough for most of us. Yes, you can have a list as long as your arm that some people would tell you, you must do this, you must do that, you must do something else. Well, if you try to get all of those things addressed, I think you'll just be chasing your tail and you'll very quickly give up. What I've found over the years is if I concentrate on these 3 things here, a lot of the other things will fall into place. And when I say suit locality, I'm talking about the amount of brood that's raised, the amount of food they use, the amount they bring in. That all comes in into that. So I suppose those 3 things can be expanded quite a bit. These bees are obviously gentle to handle. Look, they've slightly boiled over. I can tell you that was a very hot day. There are very few bees in the air. If you get somebody handling a colony and there's bees flying around all over the place, there's usually 3 things that are likely to be the cause. One is if you've got a demonstration situation, you very often get people standing at the front of the hive in the bees' flight line. So obviously they can't get back home. So what they do is fly around and very often land on people. The bees themselves, if they're bad-tempered, can be flying in the air, and the one I think which causes most problems is bad handling, and I'm afraid I do see bad handling on a lot of occasions, very often by people who are in a teaching situation. So that's why we're concentrating on it in our practical sessions. So look at the number of bees in the air there for a big colony. These are well-behaved bees. If you can allow bees to come up on the tops of the combs like that without flying about and stinging people, you've got absolute gems. Hang on to them. Now, when I say quiet, I don't mean these soft yellow things that just sit there waiting to be fed, where there's no sort of vibrancy in the colony at all. A colony like this will be very productive. I like bees that are calm on the comb. Runners are a nuisance, and when I say runners, I mean the bees that sort of run around all over the place. Very often they run off the face of the comb down to the bottom, collect under there, and then just drop off. Sometimes you've only got to give a tiny bit of smoke, and they just rush off the combs onto the floor, and then well up over the side of the box, or come out of the entrance. Now, if the bees are very mobile, so is the queen usually, and that of course gives you problems if you want to find her. On many occasions I've seen queens inside feeders, especially the rapid type feeders, things like Miller feeders and you know, those round plastic feeders, and also outside the hive as well. They just follow the bees. What it does do is, especially if you're looking for the queen or you're trying to avoid her, it increases the length of inspections. But I don't remember colonies that run around being aggressive. So not usually aggressive. What does concern me is that the longer inspections, perhaps it puts stress into the bees, which is not a good thing, because if you put stress into the bees, that then opens them up to all sorts of things like perhaps disease. So here's what I mean, calm on the comb. You can take a frame out and then not rushing around all over the place or collecting underneath the frame. When I say calm, I don't mean bees that just sit there like some of the yellow ones do. They're just waiting to be fed, and and that's it. I mean bees that are moving around with some sort of purpose, and when you're handling them, there's a sort of vibrancy to the colony as well. The principles of what we're doing should be described in the information that we've supplied you. Please read that through and try to understand it if you can, because then you'll be up to speed on what we're trying to do. Bee improvement and queen rearing aren't very often taught at local beekeeping association levels, but they're not actually difficult, because all we're trying to do is take advantage of what bees do naturally, so we can copy them. And the reason we do that is so that we can control the timing, so we know uh, when queens are going to emerge, so we know when to make up mating nukes and that sort of thing. If we just relied on natural queen cells, of course they can be different sorts of ages, and sometimes, let's take swarm cells, we've got to wait till the bees decide they're going to swarm before we can produce queen cells. With queen rearing of the artificial type that we will be demonstrating, we can control everything. I did mention timing. That is important. You should be supplied with a queen rearing table. All you need to do there is put in the date that that you want to start, or want to finish. You've got both facilities there, and it will automatically tell you what should be done on other dates. Be aware though, as I've said before, and I've said on many occasions, that we are dealing with biology which can be variable. But in my experience, they very rarely pinch much time, but they can extend things um, uh, by several days. Now, if you look at different information, some writers and speakers take the day the egg was laid as day 0, others day 1. That's okay if you use one or the other, but the problem very often comes when beekeepers take information from different places, put it together, and if you're a day out, it could be that perhaps you have one queen emerge and then of course goes round and wrecks all the others, so you can lose a whole round of queen rearing. I suggest very strongly that you call the day was the egg was laid as day 0, not day 1. And the reason I found it simple is say that the second day, when the egg is a day old, or the third day when it should be transfer or changing into a larva, is 3 days, whereas if it started as day 1, it would be day 4, if you get what I mean. And I try to keep things simple in beekeeping if I possibly can, so that I can understand it. Natural queen cells are very much a part of beekeeping, and they are important. We have swarm cells, we have emergency cells, we have supersedure cells, which of course are the impulses that bees use naturally. All of these cells are frowned upon by a few people, and I think really all they're doing is just copy other people who also frown as well. But if you look at it seriously, bees have been using them for millions of years, and that's all they've had. So why is it all of a sudden that beekeepers come along and decide that they're not any good? But in any case, I reckon a high percentage of queens, could be, I don't know, 70 or 80% of queens come from natural queen cells anyway. And why is it that somebody will tell you how to do an artificial swarm using queen cells that are swarm cells, when they tell you not to use natural cells? It doesn't make sense to me. I'm saying if they come from a good colony and they're available, they are a very valuable resource, and I've very often used those alongside what I call artificial queen rearing, because if they come from a good colony, let's not waste them if we can help it. So that's it. That brings us to the end of part 1, and hope to see you in part 2.